Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present two seasoned executives who are giants in the indie sector of the business. And with Indie Week right around the corner, I am so honored to share these two music moguls with you. I promise you will leave today smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. And also, this is very important. Please make sure your chat setting is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and Better Than Booze. So let's get down to business. Today, we welcome my friend Tony Alexander. Tony is co-founder, president, and managing director of Made in Memphis Entertainment, a full-service entertainment group comprising of mime publishing, heavy hitters music, beatroot music, 4U recording, and adaptive music. All that is dedicated to reestablishing Memphis as the key music industry hub and expanding its influence worldwide. A committed industry community activist, Tony is proud member of Leadership Music Class 2023, serves as treasurer of the American Association of Independent Music, and is president of the Association of Independent Music Publishers Atlanta chapter. Welcome, Tony. It is an honor to finally have you on the program.
Thank you so much, Tom.
And joining Tony is Marc Caruso. Marc is the CEO and co-founder of Angry Mob Music, an independent music publisher dedicated to standing up for the rights of songwriters, composers, artists, and creatives in the complicated and dynamic entertainment industry. Since its inception, Marc has developed Angry Mob into a diversified music company with successful operations in music, licensing, master rights management, creative development, custom music production, and more. Marc has become a champion for musician and songwriters' rights as a board member and former president of Association of Independent Music Publishers, LA chapter, a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the Recording Academy, and the Motion Pictures Editors Guild, among others. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to our platform today. Take it away, gentlemen.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Great to have this opportunity. And Marc, it's good to be able to catch up with you. I know a lot of times we've been, keeping each other updated on some of the things that are happening with our kids and family. But this is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk a little bit about our business journeys. And, something I've been wanting to ask you for a while is since, we're both entrepreneurs, I'd love to kind of hear the story of how you started in the music industry and got to the place where you launched Angry Mob.
Well, my story is probably like many others. It's not a linear line. It's a zigzag. I originally wanted to be a film composer. I wanted to score films, television shows. So I went to USC, School of Music, the Thorne School of Music, and then afterwards did a secondary music school dedicated to film scoring and composing. And I initially started as an intern at Hans Zimmer's studio after that. So the typical path of a composer would be out of the intern pool, you'd be offered a job as an assistant composer, and then you would kind of work your way up that ladder. Well, I was an intern and I got offered a job in a new division that they just started there. That was a music editorial division. So, not knowing if I'd ever be offered a job as a composer, I said yes. And that kind of set me on this journey. I was a music editor there for about 3 or 4 years and then went freelance independent afterwards. And I was a music editor for about 12 years. But in that time, I really learned about kind of the team aspect and collaboration that we did as an editor, working with the producers and the director and the film editor and all the other editors of dialogue and sound effects. But this collaboration of working towards a greater good really kind of lit a spark in me that I didn't know that I needed when I was aspiring to be a film composer. That was somewhat a little bit more of an isolated existence compared to the rest of the team on the lot. So, yeah, just saying yes kind of got me into this side of the industry, and then that led to Angry Mob later on. But yeah, how about you? How did you start?
Well, my path certainly was unconventional. I started out as a patent attorney, and I guess my love for business really came from while I was in law school and graduate school. I had some professors that were starting biotech companies, and they were asking me to help them with the patent work because they knew I was in law school. They knew I was a patent agent at the time. And I got a taste of entrepreneurship at that point. And so that allowed me to just continue. I've been a serial entrepreneur over the years, but music was more of something than when I moved to Memphis almost 15 years ago. I, a mutual friend actually introduced me to David Porter because there was a legal issue he had as he was setting up his nonprofit, the Consortium MMT, which is set up to help songwriters, producers, and recording artists really develop their skills. And after that experience, where 2 or 3 cohorts had come through the program, and we noticed that uh, many of those artists and producers and songwriters relocated after they finished the program, that David and I just said, we need to find a way to stop talent leaving the city of Memphis. And so we raised some money and we started Made in Memphis Entertainment. But that's kind of how I ended up in the music business, not necessarily something that was on my radar most of my life or most of my career. It was just a chance meeting with a Hall of Fame songwriter. And we built a tremendous relationship, and that kind of led to launching the company.
When you look back, do you have any feeling of is the grass greener that outside of the music industry, or what was
Well,
that like?
the music industry is a challenging business. It it
Mhm.
it will test you in every way, particularly from an emotional standpoint.
Mhm.
I know
100%.
you experienced this. Anyone in the music business probably can tell you you've quit the business many times because it can be emotionally draining, and then you have those moments that are just so special that cause you to say, "Yeah, I'm willing to do this over and over again." So you have those moments that continue to remind you why you do it,
Mhm.
but there are a lot of days that make you want to feel that you should be doing something else.
I think it's that thing though that it's like any industry really, that if you love what you're doing and you love who you're doing it with, those challenges, those roadblocks, those stumbles, you're extra motivated to overcome them and to fight through them and to kind of bring everybody with you in that challenge of that fight. So yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
comes down to people at the end of the
Well,
day.
yeah, it is definitely a people thing, and so that's I'm sure why, being an entrepreneur as yourself, you think about being able to build something so that you can be instrumental in choosing the people that you do work with and the people that you do serve in the capacity that you've chosen. But I am curious. I know we can get into the details of launching Angry Mob, but why publishing as opposed to going into recorded music?
It actually stemmed from the idea that originally I wanted to write music for films. That this idea about being at the creation stage of music. And so when I was a music editor, I was cutting songs, I was cutting score, all that music was already written. And this idea of working towards a common good, so not to be in the spotlight, but to be part of a group that is helping achieve a single vision. In this case, it was a film or a show. So after about a dozen years of being a music editor, where Angry Mob and publishing came out of was it checked the boxes of returning to being there at the creation of a song, where a song is born into the world, even though I'm not writing it, but to be alongside it. And then the idea about working as a group to better something else, something better. In this case, for us, publishing, I see that as the songwriter is at the core of that. So what is a publisher? It's to serve their songwriters. And so that kind of taking those two lessons that took 12 to 14 years for me to learn, then kind of really is what lit the spark to take the scary leap to start a new company as opposed to just go and work at a publisher. But really, when we started, we were very sync focused. So the idea about people, I made a lot of friends and colleagues along the way as an editor in the sync world. And so then even supervisors, I apologized. I said, we're going to become, we're pitching you now instead of us being pitched. But yeah, so it was to be there, when songs are made, there's a saying in the industry, we all know it, it all starts with a song. And so
Right.
to be there for that was very important. And that's where the rewarding moment comes for me, when a great song is written by a songwriter. Just in the same way that, as an editor, to see, to experience that wonderful score or theme that really worked for something, so I'm still living that enjoyment. And
Hey.
that's why publishing.
Okay. Well, so how did the relationships that you developed as a music editor, how did they play into your I guess the things that you're doing now? Have they been instrumental in being able to grow Angry Mob?
They were instrumental, really at the start. So we started the company in 2009, and we were almost 100% sync focused. We were in Los Angeles. Myself and the other co-founders were actually alumni of Hans Zimmer's studio. It was called Media Ventures back then, now Remote Control. And to have a built-in client base that we already had relationships with gave us that kickstart to starting something fresh. And then over the years, over the 15, now 16 years, everything else starts to grow and you build upon it. But that was the foundation to start. It started with those relationships and the people. So.
Okay. So I'm assuming then now, as you've continued to evolve the business, the relationships have continued to expand, new relationships. How important? Because I know we probably have some younger people early in their career that are listening in. How important are relationships in building a business and having sustainability in the music business?
Just a little, no, it's everything.
Yeah.
Right? Because the thing is, you never know where opportunity is going to come from. And relationships I see it, I'm a big thing about metaphors. My team is probably sick of hearing me using analogies and symbolism, but this idea of your network, and I hate that word because it seems very, to me, when you say network, I'm building my network, it seems very transactional. But this idea that when you meet people, you're planting these seeds, and a seed only grows into something that bears fruit that may have value to you if you water it, right? And so creating a friend first then builds a bond that some business or an opportunity, or they'll think of you for something or advocate for you in a situation. That's where the real meaningfulness comes from, those relationships. So within the music industry, the entertainment industry, but really all industries, it's a people driven, success is driven by by the
Yeah.
people. It's not manufacturing a product that it's okay, it's about the technology and maybe the efficiency of design or whatnot. What we do is in service to others. And so that's why it's absolutely critical. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, yeah, I would echo that. And having been in multiple other industries, I've been in telecommunications, healthcare, alternative energy, many of these industries before I came to music. And I will say without a shadow of a doubt that the music industry is the most relationship-driven industry I've ever been in. And that's even being in private practice as an attorney. And those relationships are key to have a book of business. But the music business is very relationship driven. And so one of the things that we even share within the company, and even when I talk with artists, there are three things that I tell them to focus in on, and how to cultivate relationships. You need to have what we refer to as recruitment type relationships, where you're building new relationships.
Mhm.
So these are relationships with people that you did not know previously. You need to have retention, where you're working on relationships that exist, whether that be for an artist, working with your existing fan base, cultivating those relationships, deepening those relationships. And then on the recruitment side is finding new fans. And
Mhm.
then there's also what we call the reclamation relationships, or relationships that either existed before or some kind of break took place, whether it be um, in the corporate setting. Maybe you have former employees. Instead of that relationship breaking down, you can say, okay, they're alumni of the company. These are people that we want to continue to cultivate relationships with. Or also in the business setting, if these are people that you wanted to recruit to be clients and ultimately they chose to go elsewhere, you want to keep maintaining those relationships, because there may be an opportunity for something to work out in the future, or they may even be a referral source. And so those kinds of buckets of relationships work, whether they be personal, whether they be business, whether they be artist fan type relationships. It's important to cultivate in all three of those areas and make sure you organize the way you live that way. And so when we use our mantra of our twofold mission in our company, that we want to serve creatives and we want to develop the next generation of music executives, we always tell the people within the company, if you're not working on those three buckets of relationships at any given time, every day, every week, you're never going to be the executive that you want to be, because it's going to be all about those relationships. As you progress through your career, if you didn't invest early, you're not going to have the relationships needed to get to the pinnacle of where you want to be career wise.
It's interesting when you define those buckets. It's a lot like in the sounds somewhat banal, but like customer acquisition for a company that focuses on traditional customers, right? This customer acquisition, customer retention. We've all got in marketing of if it's been a while since you've made a purchase, right? And it's somewhat,
Right.
it's this in the personal relationship side, and not to make it seem formulaic, but it is very similar to that idea and what you're saying. I think it's great how you define that and put those labels on those buckets. But again, not to make it seem transactional. It's more human being to human being, and not something that you need from somebody else, or that we've all had new relationships where it seems very one-sided.
Oh,
Where
for
it's a
sure.
lot of asks, but not a lot of facilitating, if
Yeah.
you will. And
And I know.
authenticity is important in the relationships in this business.
Well, that's exactly right. And I know a lot of my professional service colleagues, whether it be attorneys or so forth. One of the things that we've come to realize, we have people who come out of the blue and they say, "Hey, you were on my mind." I said, "Oh, really?" And then they spring on us a request. And I always say that oftentimes, when it comes to the law, uh, one legal term that almost everybody knows is pro bono. And so they want the lawyer to give them free advice. And what I would say, well, at least, try to romance me first before you start asking for all this stuff. Why can't you develop the relationship before you actually need something from somebody? And so I think to your point is relationships are they are currency, but they're not. People aren't to be treated like currency. It's
Mhm.
knowing that you have a relationship with somebody and that you could ask them for something if you needed to, but they're not going to feel like that's the only reason that you pick up the phone or the only reason that you send the message. It reminds me of what Clarence Avant used to always say. He said, "I don't have problems, I have friends." And what that's basically speaking to is there's nothing that can happen in your life that the right relationships can't help you get out of. And I think that's when you really understand relationships, then you will treat people appropriately and really do a good job in cultivating them in the right way.
I think about every successful career path. You look at, there are moments where that path was really accelerated or the trajectory changed by a single person along the way, right? You can hark back to meeting Dave Porter, right? That moment happening, and then you and Dave doing something great together, right? From that moment. So you can trace it back to people along the way, and it's the people that really make that journey successful. So, I mean, you can always think you can name the names in your head. Who was it
Yeah,
along the way that really got me to where I am today? And
well,
so
that's true.
without those people, that's why this is a people business. Yeah.
So let me ask is, because and I'll kind of first kind of give a little scenario and then just kind of get your thoughts on it because we've had some conversations with some of our newer team members, who are new to the workforce, that is, and oftentimes they see networking or building relationships almost as a waste of time because it's tough enough to get the work done within a business day, and then to spend additional time trying to cultivate relationships, don't necessarily see the value early in their career.
Mhm.
So, what would you say to a person that's just getting started, trying to strike the right balance of getting the work done and improving themselves professionally, and also at the same time building the key relationships that they're going to need to continue to grow?
I always try to tell either my mentees in a mentorship program or young executives, aspiring executives, don't just think short term, you have to think long term, right? And you have to account for the time and the energy that it takes to invest in those long term needs. And relationship building is long term, right? The work in front of you when you show up at your desk or your computer each morning, that's the short term, and it does have to get done. There are deadlines, of course, but you need to carve out time and mental energy and effort
Yeah.
for those long-term goals. And building relationships is a long-term goal that may turn into short-term goal achievement, right?
Uh,
But yeah, I mean, that's always been my advice. Don't just look what's right in front of you. Think what is deep. Try to think about what you don't see yet and allow the opportunity for something to happen that you may not have planned for and expected for. Those are those long-term relationships and goals that then those sprout up from. So,
Yeah. So Mark, let me ask you about, because I know you're very active in trade associations. In particular, you've been very involved with the AIMP. And so, before we kind of dig deeply into that, I would certainly love to hear how you feel these kinds of organizations have helped you in your professional development.
I, what it's done is really provide an opportunity to meet people. So going back to this whole line that we're talking about, organizations bring people together by their very definition. And so to be involved in an organization, yeah, if it's an educational organization that puts on panels to be informed. Absolutely. That's good education that you may not get elsewhere, insights, but it's about who you meet. Even here in this webinar, people talking in the chat and Tom's motivation to kind of introduce yourselves in the chat. And even though this is online, it's still an organization that's bringing people together. And so that is for me, that's been the value of being involved. And to move from being a attendee, a member, and then getting into a leadership role only just amplified that, because then it was an ability to actually give back what I got out of an organization, right? Because as a member, maybe you're younger and you just join, or you're new to the industry and you join, you're receiving benefits, member benefits, they call it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then, if you volunteer your time to contribute to the steering of the organization, now you're paying it back to those members. And so that's why it's a reward, a personal reward separate from something gained.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you started the the Atlanta chapter of the AIMP.
Yeah, well,
Why?
but the thing was, it was great to have support from presidents like you, willing to devote time and energy to help us build, and I did learn a lot, and I was able to meet a lot of people, and so I do see the value in the organization. Sometimes it's hard to get people to see the immediate value, particularly when they're kind of on the side. And we've all been there. These organizations, particularly our volunteer organizations, and there's a large time commitment. I know when you were running the LA chapter of AIMP, it was like probably having another full-time job that required so much from you, and you were truly doing it for reasons other than compensation because you weren't getting any. But yeah, so I'd love to kind of hear what was the why for you to continue to serve and at the highest level, knowing that there was no financial remuneration.
Yeah, I talked about that personal motivation of about giving back, right? About helping support and lead an organization that I felt I got benefits from as a member. But what it didn't touch on in kind of my last answer is that these organizations, especially in the independent sector of the industry, have a voice that collect the independent voices, and so the idea about leading a chapter, or in whether as president or being on the board, it helps amplify what needs to be said. And so to have input on that the AIMP could maybe influence what's happening in the industry for the benefit of songwriters and publishers, that's the value to me. Now, if you want to connect the dot, okay, well, if there are changes in the industry that benefit publishers and songwriters that are supported by groups like the AIP and being a part of that, then that does benefit Angry Mob.
Yeah.
A rising tide lifts all boats. It benefits all the publishers, or at least it should. And so, yeah, there is a business interest there, but that's secondary to the organization and its mission. Whether if you believe in the mission, which, speaking of the IMP, it's to promote, to educate, and to advocate, to a sense, the indie music publishing community. And as an indie publisher, that is about as important to me as it comes.
Yeah. So I
What's
think,
your why?
well,
Huh?
well, it really goes back to just what I've experienced throughout my career through all of these different industries, and that is that I just have found that it's almost my purpose in life is to really support people's professional development, really wanting to see people win. And the Atlanta chapter, when the Nashville and New York and LA chapters approached me and said, "Look, we're trying to launch this chapter in Atlanta. We need to find somebody who can help lead the charge." Um, and I guess the challenges they had before, I knew that what it was going to really take was a grassroots effort dealing with self-administered songwriters, dealing with small businesses in Atlanta, because I think a lot of times people confuse Atlanta for this music mecca, but from an infrastructure standpoint, it's just not there.
Mhm.
And so if you were to talk to a lot of people and say, okay, name some significant publishing companies that are based in Atlanta, or significant labels for that matter, based in Atlanta, they would be hard pressed to point to any. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have a rich ecosystem of talent. It just means that from an infrastructure standpoint, it did not mature from the late 80s and 90s in a way the trajectory was off. And so over time, Atlanta became more of a film and television city than a music city, even though it retains a reputation of having lots of talent. And
Sure.
so what that allowed me to do was begin to work with a wide variety of people to try to build the chapter. And it's been a wonderful experience. I've met some amazing people, but also it's been able to give a voice to a population of folks in Atlanta that have been ignored. Because
Mhm.
another thing about Atlanta, it's built around the sensational. So the bigger than life characters get all the attention, and the people who are doing the daily nuts and bolts work are often neglected. So rights management companies, administrators had really not been given a spotlight or a voice, and that's what we're doing. And then we're also tapping into the student community in Atlanta like never before. So we're very optimistic about that chapter. But the reason why I chose to do it was because it was going to give me an opportunity to really work with people and help them achieve their professional goals. And we're starting to see that come to fruition, and so I love that.
Was that lack of the pre-existing infrastructure there in Atlanta, did that present a challenge when starting the chapter, that there wasn't a way to really reach as efficiently if there was some sort of a structure?
Well, I think that it's a challenge if you want to approach it conventionally.
Hmm.
But I guess for me, being, the entrepreneurial mind just kind of kicked in and said, okay, we have a real problem here. And so what does a solution look like? And so we tried to craft a solution to address that. I know a lot of times people approach business the wrong way, and they have a solution looking for a problem. And that's kind of why I think a lot of organizations struggle in a city like Atlanta, or even a Memphis or a New Orleans, where we operate as a business, is because you go into these markets, they've had a rich tradition of some amazing artists that have come out of these environments, and you just assume that you can just use the same methodology you might use in a Nashville, or you might use in an LA or New York, but the culture is so different. And so I was not I was not discouraged because I understood the culture. I went to college in Atlanta. I understood that it had a very different culture. And if we approached it properly, we could build something special. And so that's why I said early on with the executive council of AIMP that, look, the Atlanta chapter is going to be successful, but it's going to look very different
Mhm.
than the other three chapters, because the approach has to be different.
And I think also too, there's not one definition of success,
That's
right?
right.
That this chapter is new. You saw the need. You saw what it was that you wanted to do in terms of the vision of the chapter to be able to serve the community. And if you're serving the community and you're reaching those who you want to reach, that's success. And your success definition can change over time. It can evolve, right? But there's not a there's you don't it's apples to oranges. You don't always have to measure yourself against how another is approaching what they define as success.
Well, that's right. And I think we're excited about the energy that we're getting from the student memberships.
Mhm.
We've had so many. We had close to 40 new members join us in the last month and a half,
Oh, that's
and a
awesome.
lot of them are students, and they're excited about being actively involved in shaping the way the organization presents itself in the community. So that's also going to be helpful when we really start to do more local advocacy, because we now have a population of people who have historically been the ones that have changed the world through advocacy and protest, and it's
Mhm.
always been students and young people, and so that's kind of what we're excited about, which kind of brings me to even ask you about how, as you sat in leadership, and how that led you to say, okay, the next step, I really need to be a little bit more vocal on the advocacy side. I know you wrote a really nice op-ed piece for Billboard, and you've been active in advocacy. Just tell us a little bit about kind of what brought you to that point.
Yeah, it well, the industry brought me to that point. Events in the industry, if you will. No, it was, we're an independent publisher. And so we don't have, and we are, boutique to midsize by choice because we wanted to grow our company, not where we wanted to grow it very measurably, intentionally, personal relationships with who we work with our songwriters, with our artists and producers. And so, as a smaller company, we need the support and the help of things greater than us, right? Now, the greater than us is other independents together, collectively. It's organizations like the AIMP, the NMPPA. And so, with that, we are somewhat beholden. And when there were certain kind of industry happenings over the last couple of years, whether it was, it's in the public, so TikTok licensing or Spotify bundling, and these challenges that are presented to publishers, the op-ed came about because this idea of independence really needing to unify was a very important thing because we see it firsthand with our own company. And so the root of it is that indies on the publishing side, we're 40% of the market. That's 15% bigger than the largest major. But we're fractured. And so the point of the op-ed and what I've been really motivated to advocate for is really unifying the independent, the indie publisher voice to be able to have some leverage. And this isn't a thing where it's indies versus majors. This is really that if indies collectively can be unified and have a strong voice alongside the singular voices of the majors, that creates a very strong and powerful force for the publishing industry compared to who's on the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
Who are enormous, well-funded conglomerates, if you
Yeah.
will. And so we really, when I say unifying, it isn't just the indies, it's indies together and then with the majors. So, that really was the kind of the light, it's a light bulb moment, but it's a light bulb that wasn't just flicked on. That dimmer went way up.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So, because I'm sure when you launch Angry Mob, you say, okay, we're going to serve the creative community and we're going to do all this great work. But were you envisioning that you would have then become a thought leader and speak to these types of topics?
I tell you, it really was my experience with the AIMP that that started this path of being more vocal because the AIMP allowed an opportunity for me to hear others who are speaking of the same challenges, to share those challenges and what are we doing about it? And then that might be on a panel or it might just be in discussions in the room. And it was through that that really, when you start to hear that the challenges that other people face are shared with you, that's when, you start to, you choose or you choose not to say, okay, I want to try to make a difference here. If I was only in Angry Mob, I would have heard the shared challenges, but maybe not in such a open environment. So it was the AMP that really fueled it or poured gasoline on the fire.
Okay, interesting. And so, and just thinking about it, because you shared some statistics about how the indie sector is growing consistently. So we're gaining market share, but we're fractured, and we're fractured in a sense that the recorded music side of the indie sector and the publishing side of the indie sector are not necessarily cooperating with one
Hmm.
another. And it seems like there's still a lot of finger pointing, very similar to how society has become generally divided and not necessarily willing to have conversation.
Hmm.
So, do you have any recommendations for the the recorded music side of the business, that some lessons learned from publishing that could be beneficial in bringing that side together, and potentially even bringing recorded music and publishing together in a unified front as indies to do what's best for the indie community?
I mean, I'll speak to the indie side of that, which is, I mentioned earlier about shared challenges, and I brought up TikTok licensing or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Independent record labels faced the same issue about what 6 7 months after the indie publishers did, where the Merlin license wasn't renewed, right? So we have a lot in common. When I say we, indie publishers have a lot in common with indie labels about who they are challenged by, and I think some of the solutions can be done together, but others are unique, meaning that the publishing industry is so regulated that sometimes that there's a different path to change that publishers have versus the quote unquote free market of the recorded music side. But I think working together can make changes in support of each other, right? So even though the outcome and how you reach an outcome may take different roads for each side, but if we advocate for each other, publishers are, let me give a, for instance, publishers are in support of labels being paid for radio airplay, labels and artists. And this idea that if we are being compensated, and this is my belief, okay, so let me say it from my side. I'm not
Sure.
speaking with AIMP hat. This is as a independent publisher. I support record labels being paid for terrestrial radio. The
Mhm.
fact that the U.S. is the only, not the only, one of three that does not get that pay master performance for radio is, to me, it's crazy. But
Yeah.
you know, so we've if we support each other, we can help institute change that benefits the other, and then the industry as a whole actually does benefit. I mean, you're on the board of the A2IM. What do you see from that seat compared to your AIMP seat?
Well, we know that historically A2IM has been very aggressive in wanting to um, pursue the interests of labels to the exclusion of the interests of publishers.
Hmm.
That has changed. And I do think that Richard, who's been the CEO of A2M, has done a really good job of understanding. And so even in creating a committee of publishers to start sharing insights as to how we have common interests and concerns. Also with Abby North and Richard sitting down on several occasions at various forums, having the debate about what's good for the indie community from the publisher's perspective and from the label's perspective has been beneficial, because I think we're starting to see that we have more in common than we thought. And so I'm excited about some of those bridges that are being built. But what I do see still is that um, there's not the sense of collaboration that I see so often in the publishing area. And I'll share an example, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this. But back in 2018, when we acquired Heavy Hitters Music Group from Cindy Bedell Slaughter and Bill Slaughter, uh, I was just amazed, because Made in Memphis Entertainment had been operating primarily on the recorded music side, and so that was our introduction to the publishing business. And the amount of just camaraderie and interaction amongst the sync community and the publishing community generally, it was just shocking to me just how the time spent together and sharing best practices and sharing ideas and traveling together to meet with um, potential sub-publisher relationships at Medium and things like that. It was very different than what we experienced on the recorded music side, and so it was refreshing to just see just how you can be technically competitors while at the same time working very cooperatively to make sure that everybody succeeded.
There's a uniqueness to publishing that you don't find on the recorded side generally or in other industries. IP is shared and jointly owned, right? Publishers and their songwriters, or their songwriters write songs together with your competing publishers. You jointly own those works. You work together to find opportunities for those songs. So this idea of, yes, we are competitors, but we are collaborators is ingrained in the publishing industry. And I think I think what you experienced when you first saw it when you bought Heavy Hitters is that spirit of collaboration amongst what in any other industry would be fierce competitors. And it's why this idea of collecting the voices on the indie side might be quote unquote easier on the publishing side because
Yeah.
we're used to working together. I hope that's my belief that I'm going with here.
Yeah.
But so it's and I think that spirit can hopefully influence these alliances working across the sectors of the industry. So, the AIMP working with A2IM, with working with SONA, with working with groups that want to, use that collaborative spirit in a different and uh, for a different vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just one additional thought I just wanted to kind of explore with you, and that's just around, just kind of looking forward, and so I'd love to get your thoughts both from the creative side and from the business side. If you were trying to advise artists and songwriters, and then separately executives, what would you share with them as far as how they can get more involved in the industry and particularly with these trade associations to help move things forward and make life better for themselves and for the community as a whole?
For the younger group or
Yeah.
the emerging
Yes.
group, I would say educate yourselves about what's happening in the industry. Educate yourselves through these organizations. If there's panels, if there's webinars, if there's information materials about, what are the challenges that the industry face? Because if you think it's something that is way out there, you don't need to worry about it because all you are focused on is your immediate career needs in front of you, whether it's writing songs or performing or whatever it is. But you're affected by it. So learn about it. And if you learn about it, then maybe there's motivation there to be involved, to be a voice. The benefit now in today's world is that it's a benefit and a curse, but
Okay.
everybody has a platform to have a wide reach online. And so if you are advocating even just for yourself within the industry, that actually helps, um, it helps the conversation advance. And I think that, speaking on the publishing side, songwriters are more visible now than they ever have been. They were always part of the, call it the B2B side of the industry. But songwriters have a brand, they have a voice, they're visible to the public now. So use that voice to make change. Um, Making change or advocating for change in the music industry is no different than advocating for any other important cause or need that you have in your life or that you see the needs in other lives. For the executives, I would challenge you to remind yourself why you're in this business. Are you in this business? Um, well, I'll answer my why. I said it earlier, to help songwriters achieve their vision, their career goals. And for
Yeah.
me to be able to do that, um, advocating for greater industry change helps them. And so for executives, see that purpose. It's yes, you may have, or you do have goals and objectives within your company, within your business, within your title or your role, but use that in answering the why are you doing this? And then that can hopefully motivate yourselves to make change. And if you're at a level that is a certain executive or a title, you have a potentially a greater voice and reach. And we talked earlier about network, getting, voicing that to your network and hopefully motivating others to feel how you feel about what needs to be changed in the industry.
Yeah,
You know, that's
that's
it.
right. I know because I agree with you. Knowing your why keeps you going even when things become drudgery.
Mhm.
And so I was sharing, I think it was at Folk Alliance recently back in Montreal with a large group of artists. And it was refreshing being there because usually when I go to conferences, and particularly if I'm speaking at a conference, the artists and the songwriters aren't there,
Mhm.
and it's okay to speak to other business people, but the folks I really want to get the message are the artists and the songwriters. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to interact with them and share with them the importance of investing in their professional development. That part of their budget, yeah, just as much as they need to set aside money to market their product, they need to set aside money to grow professionally. And that is understanding the business of the industry. Uh, we have a situation that a lot of artists and songwriters hoped for, and that is no more gatekeepers.
Mhm.
But with the removal of the gatekeepers also came greater responsibility that rests now on the shoulders of artists and songwriters. That okay, you don't have all these people um, doing all these things for you, um, and so now you have to do all these things yourself. And so you have to figure out how to do it. If I'm going to wear 12 hats, I at least need to know what each one entails.
Mhm.
And so that's been an interesting thing, is just trying to get artists and songwriters to understand that even if you don't desire to be a business executive yourself, you have to have the basics. You have to understand the basics. And you can't assume that just because somebody has been in the industry for 20 years and managed a superstar, that they know what they were doing, because that superstar may have been successful regardless of whether or not this individual was in their life.
Mhm.
And so you want to know how to do certain things, and oftentimes they're not, artists and songwriters aren't investing in going to the places where they can get that information.
It's excellent advice. We talked earlier about short term and long term. Short term, artists and songwriters should learn the business because they have to do it themselves, right?
Right.
That's the short-term need. Longer term, let's say they grow, they become successful enough to be signed to a company where that company is doing the business aspect. If you know about the business, you can be a better partner as a songwriter to that publisher because you speak the same language at that point on the business side. You can offer up ideas and suggestions that because you know how the business works and whatnot, that you can offer that maybe may help that relationship be more productive, or who is working on your behalf can empower them more. Same thing, obviously, on the artist side with label, learning about how does distribution work, to be able to ask the right questions,
That's
right?
right.
To be
That's
able
right.
to find something that might be wrong on your statement,
Well, that
whatever.
that's
Hopefully
exactly
not,
right.
but
And
Mhm.
that's one of the things we stress even at Adaptive Music is that the informed um, customer is the best customer. And so we want to empower and equip people to understand things so that they then can delegate properly.
Yeah.
You can delegate and or hire or bring in the right professionals because now you know what they're supposed to be doing. I
Mhm.
think we all get frustrated when we are being asked to do something that is virtually impossible. And so when a an artist or songwriter understands what the role is, and so realistic expectations are set at the outset, everybody's going to be happy. But when you have a lack of understanding of how the business works, you then will have unrealistic expectations. And so I think that sometimes, like even with music business programs today, um, people assume that if someone went to a great school with a music business program, they're going to be an expert. But the reality of the matter is, music business programs are very similar to law school. They teach you a vocabulary. You learn how to be a practitioner on the job. And so you
Absolutely.
actually have to get out here and do it. And
Mhm.
so for an artist and a songwriter to go and start learning from practitioners how these things actually work in practice, not just um, textbook, but in practice, this is what has to be done and this is how it's done. I think that could be extremely beneficial. And so there are certain conferences, webinars, different organizations that are putting out information that could be tremendously valuable to artists and songwriters to accelerate their education to get to where they need to be. Because what I will say, and this is a little soapbox moment for me, a bit of a pet peeve for me, is that the music industry is the one industry where you can represent someone else's intellectual property without any certification or skills or
Mhm.
anything. So to be a patent attorney, I have to have a science or engineering degree. I have to sit for a patent bar exam. If you want to represent uh, athletes, you have to be certified as an agent with each of the different leagues. But in the music business, you could be representing an artist and a songwriter and their repertoire. And the only thing that you have in common is you grew up on the same street. And so I do think that if artists and songwriters had a better understanding themselves, they could be a little bit more judicious in choosing who they're going to have representing their interests. And
Mhm.
then that way, we won't see as much exploitation that we see in the industry that's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like a company hiring a new employee. If the company doesn't know what the need is and what the responsibilities are going to be and what success in that role looks like, how can you hire the right person?
Right.
And if you're a songwriter or an artist and choosing to, like you said, the person on your block says they're a manager or
Yeah.
they're a publisher or they have a label, it's like, how do you know? Yeah, there's no way to vet that unless to your point, it's actually, if you do it yourself, then you know how to delegate, and then you know what it is that you're looking for in a partner, in a representative.
That's right. And I know I see and Angelica has asked an interesting question is, looking for various funding sources. And I'm happy to say that in the music business, there are lots of funding sources. The difficulty now for an artist or a songwriter is to determine what's best for them in their particular situation.
Mhm.
So, for example, you can have a distributor that's going to offer funding. You have a publisher that's going to offer funding. You have financiers like Sound Royalties, Roy5, Beat Bread that are willing to offer funding. You have, if you have a big enough revenue stream, banks will be willing. So there are a lot of different funding options, just friends and family, and you investors. So there, and I've shared kind of there's an analysis that can be done that you can evaluate all of these different options to see what's best for your particular situation, because everyone's situation is different, but there are quite a few. And it's probably a longer conversation than what we can talk about here, but at least wanted to acknowledge it. And maybe Angelica, if you can get my contact information, I can walk you through how you evaluate those scenarios, because it's important to be able to not just go for the most money, but go for the right amount of money for you under your circumstances.
Just to tack on to that also, just make sure that if you say yes to a certain funding source, that you're very clear what you are giving up, if anything, in return. So don't get blinded by the shiny chrome of funding. Get a real understanding of, well, what's inherent in that relationship.
That's right. Yeah, because
My advice as a non-attorney, by the way.
I do think that a lot of times people go for the largest dollar amount and they don't read the fine print as to what they are giving up in exchange for that money. There are a lot of sources where they could get access to capital that it's not giving up necessarily ownership, but there are some things that they have to be aware about, so taking into consideration a variety of factors. But that's important for people to understand, because I do think that that's on the mind of a lot of creatives, is how do I fund my career? Based on the research that I've done and what I share, is most of your career funding as an emerging artist is coming from your day job. And then you can then supplement that with other sources and then start building relationships beyond that. But there definitely are different sources, and that's a whole nother conversation.
It's a whole other webinar.
Yeah, yeah, it's one that I like to talk about because I want people to be informed.
Oh, I see Tom.
Guys, I could let this go on and on and on, because the wisdom that you are sharing with this audience is worth its weight in gold. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. And Mark, you mentioned another webinar. Boy, I'd love to see chapter 2 of this one at some point down the road. Folks, I promised you at the outset you'd leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. And I guarantee you we delivered on that brand promise today. The wisdom these two guys have shared is incredible. And, the coolest thing about what I heard you all saying is it's just good old common sense in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? It's, Tony, you nailed it. You don't have to have a special degree to be successful in this music industry. You got to hustle. You got to be smart. You got to be well connected. But you don't necessarily have to have a degree. And so I totally hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you laying it out there as cleanly as you did. Anyway, with that, I do need to wrap it up today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for everything you've done for the industry, especially the indie sector of it, which needs all the love it can always get. Hope to see you all in Atlanta next week at Music Biz. In the meantime, be nice to everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks,
Thank you,
Mark.
Tom. Thank you, everybody.
Later.
All right. Take care, everyone.